Hello and welcome to another week of Talking Faith. Unfortunately, as Cal and I have been trying to record, the weather just didn't agree with us over the last weekends, but we've found a time to manage to record here in the flat, and I'm happy to be able to share some of my thoughts with you, and I hope that those thoughts help and encourage you as we continue going through our series on the armour of God. So I urge you to get yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, sit down and just reflect as we continue talking faith. So this piece of the armour we're going to be speaking about today is the helmet of salvation. This is arguably the last piece of the armour of God. However, there's still another piece to come which maybe doesn't exactly look like regular armour, maybe is a little bit different. This is the helmet of salvation, something that I can see by your look you're not particularly keen, so good, I'll just leave that out.
Sorry,
The next one's the sword of the Spirit. So arguably it's armour, but it's not armour with what I was trying.
Talking about a bit of a prayer at the end, and I didn't know if we were doing that. But
oh yeah, no, sorry. I was trying to like.
What now?
No, the next one's the sword of the Spirit, but I was going to leave it out because it's not really a joke. Let's be honest. So I can't be funny on camera; it just doesn't happen. So. So today we're going to be continuing through our Armour of God series, and we've got to the helmet of salvation. I'm not going to lie, when I was growing up and when I was studying into this series, the helmet of salvation was a strange one just because in my mind salvation is something that happened at some point, but that's all it was. So it was an action that happened potentially in the past, and that's all I kind of thought it was. But then I started looking into a helmet and the importance of using a helmet when difficult times come, or when you're doing something that's maybe a little bit dangerous. Maybe when you were young, starting to learn to ride a bike, for example, that may be in the first time that someone in your life said to you time and time again, make sure you put your helmet on. And still the importance of a helmet, because a kid won't naturally try to put a helmet on as they start cycling a bike. I remember when I was growing up and I had that Batman bike that I've mentioned before during one of our Christmas sessions. Mum was always like, Johnny, put your helmet on, put your helmet on. I probably assume she was getting pretty annoyed at me every time I tried to go on the bike without it. But it was just something that got instilled into me at a young age, the importance of a helmet to make sure you're safe when you're doing something that could be potentially a little bit dangerous. And what I found quite funny was when I was staying with a family a few years ago, I became that person. As the young kids were getting ready to go out cycling, I was that person saying, put your helmet on, it's so important to have a helmet. And it just kind of like echoed through part of my past. And that's what I think is so interesting about the helmet in particular, is something we all have a great connection to, because at one point I'm sure somebody's told you to put your helmet on. And it got me thinking, well, what does it mean when it comes to helmet of salvation? Why is that so important that you've got salvation as something that protects your head? Because at the end of the day, in battle, you want to have your head protected. If you get knocked, if you get hit, you might start to lose focus. You might start to even forget where you are. If you think about people having concussions, it's so important to be safe and secure in your mind and in your head. And that's why the helmet of salvation is so important. But what does salvation mean? As I said before, I thought it was something that was just a past event. But as I was looking through it more when I was growing up and more as I've kind of continued in my faith, I've realised that salvation is so much more than something that just happened. It's an event that we take up every day as we continue our walking faith with God. So at one point we were saved, and that would be like sort of my first point of salvation, is the concept that we had an identity changed at one point in our life. Maybe we had a definitive moment, maybe it was a journey we went through when we were younger, but at some point we have entered into a relationship with God, and that changes our identity. It means we are part of His family. A helmet back in those days would have had potentially like a red or a separate coloured fur to show what type of army you belong to. Do you belong to the Romans? Then you'll have a certain colour on your head. And that's what our helmet has. It has the colour of God on our head. We acknowledge day in, day out, we've been saved by Him, and that we are now part of His family. And that helps us to acknowledge that day in, day out, no matter what we're facing, God is with us. That's the first thing that I want to reflect on, this identity that comes through salvation in God. Secondly, is through Scripture we're called time and time again to, keep our mind and our thoughts pure. So if we're thinking about protecting our head, protecting our mind, so often when we make a mistake, it starts with a thought that starts in our head. For me, it's quite a lot of the time about food. I might be travelling from one place to another, and I'll see a McDonald's and I'll start to think, maybe I can just stop in there and pick up my lunch there rather than maybe getting a sandwich or maybe getting something a bit healthier. And all too often, I don't put that thought in my head quickly and then suddenly I'm there. I'm enjoying the food. It's not bad to have days like that, but for me, it just keeps piling up. And something that's so important is in our head and in our mind to try to keep our mind on God. And that's the second part that I think the helmet of salvation brings, is because we're part of God's family. When we have those thoughts that maybe are a bit of a temptation to us, there's a challenge that comes where God calls us to think of godly thoughts and to try get rid of those and to start thinking more focused on God. So that's the second thing that's maybe more of a constant day in, day out thing. That's a bit of a challenge for us, is to try think on God rather than like fall into temptation through the thoughts we have in our mind. Then lastly, the thing that I think is so important is through our faith we have assurance. Through our faith in Jesus, we have assurance of that future day where he will come in glory and we will be fully saved and all the darkness and evil of the world will be gone and it'll be light. And that's something we look forward to in the future, a hope that helps us as we journey through the present, because we look for that day where Jesus returns and makes us white as snow. At one point we had that decision when we became Christian and we were made white as snow, and we will be again, i.e. we were made sinless and we will be again, but we still make those mistakes day in, day out. And the courage that comes to me is the assurance that no matter the mistakes that I might make, God still loves me and God calls me to grow in my relationship with him, to have my helmet of salvation on daily, to know that because of the past, because of that decision that was made, that in the present I can take hope, that I can continue to be more like Christ, and eventually that day will come where I'll be fully like him. That's the encouragement that comes from me in the helmet of salvation, and I hope it's something that encourages you as well in your walk with God. God bless.